All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's SharePoint Introduction Wednesday webinar. My name is Juan Cuellar, and I will be your instructor for today, or your presenter for today. Now, a couple of housekeeping things before we jump in. As you can see, today's schedule will go from 11:30 through about 12:30. Now, for today's webinar, what we'll do is we will go through the presentation and some demonstrations on SharePoint, and then we will open up for Q&A at the end. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you are more than welcome to post them in the questions pane, and we'll address them once we open up for Q&A towards the end. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. Now, let's start from the very basics. So today we are doing an introduction to SharePoint. So let's start off with the basics. What exactly is SharePoint? Well, SharePoint is so vast in its functionality and its capabilities and how it can serve us, it's kind of difficult to describe, but if you were to ask me, what is it in a nutshell? Here's how I would describe it. SharePoint is simply an online collaboration platform. Now, SharePoint came out many, many years ago, and it has evolved throughout the years based on how people use it, based on how Microsoft noticed that their users were using this platform. Now, when it first came out, it was intended to be a platform where your company could host their intranet. And many companies adopted this right away. Many government agencies adopted this. But when people started seeing the capabilities and functionality of SharePoint, they started seeing all the benefits and started using it in many other ways. For example, people started using it for project management. So all of the collaboration features that allowed us to host our intranet were also useful when we needed to manage a specific project or when a group of people were working towards a specific goal. But as time went on, people started using it for team collaboration as well. Now, what is a team? Well, a team is just a group of people working towards a specific goal, right? It could be a department, it could be a division, it could be an office, or an actual team. The thing is that with SharePoint's collaboration capabilities, it supports many different use cases. And as Microsoft has observed how people are using it, it has evolved it as time has gone on. Now, SharePoint lives in the cloud. So if you've ever heard of cloud computing or it lives in the cloud, some of you may know that all that means is that we access those resources over the internet. Now, one of the benefits of this is that regardless of what your current situation is, regardless of what device you're working on or where you're working, because SharePoint lives in the cloud, as long as you have internet connection on those devices, you'll be able to access those resources and collaborate from any device. Now, mainly, we access SharePoint through the web, meaning through a web browser. You can use whichever browser you prefer, but on any device, you can just open it up and get to your SharePoint resources. And we'll take a look at an example on how we can do so in just a bit. Now, SharePoint is definitely a secure environment, meaning that SharePoint is permission driven. There are going to be many different SharePoint sites, many different resources within the sites, and it's all permission driven, meaning that those who need to get access to certain resources will be able to access them. And those who shouldn't have access to them will be restricted. Now, once you have access, then the other question is, well, what functionality do you have permissions to do? So let's talk about the three main permission levels, or what I like to call the three main roles in SharePoint. Now, if you need access to a specific site, the minimum, most of the time, that you're going to be is a visitor. Now, a visitor has the ability to access the information, read the information online, and if there are documents, they may have the ability to download those documents and get their own copies. Now, those are what we call visitors. So the visitors get read-only access, or they can download copies of the content. But then we have members. Some people call these content managers. Now, members have the ability to add, edit, and delete content. They are also considered the contributors. Those are truly the people who are collaborating. They're adding, updating, revising, keeping information up to date. But then we also have owners. Now, the owners, they own those SharePoint sites. They manage the sites. Now, depending on what use case is being the SharePoint sites are being used in, those owners may manage the membership of the sites. In other words, the permissions. In other words, they get to decide who is a visitor, who is a member, and who else are co-owners with them. They also typically have the ability to configure the content, to configure the settings, the functionality. They can add content structures, and we'll get to that in just a bit. But again, they are the ones who manage the overall sites. Now, let's start talking about how do you access SharePoint. Now, while there are many, many different ways, today we're talking specifically about SharePoint Online. Now, SharePoint Online means that it's hosted through our Microsoft 365 subscription. Now, what that means is that within Microsoft 365, some of you may know it as Office 365, there is an app for SharePoint. It's called the SharePoint app, and this is simply your home base. Each user will have their own home base, and this home base will provide many different resources that each user has access to. So for example, there may be sites that you have chosen to follow. Now, when we say follow, meaning that you've bookmarked it within your Office 365 environment. So it'll give you access to all of the sites that you have followed. But it'll also give you access to the sites that you've recently accessed as well. Now, it'll also give you access to items that you have marked as your favorite or that you have bookmarked or saved for later. Now, it'll also provide featured links. Now, what are featured links? Featured links are specific resources that your organization has chosen to feature to make available to all users. Now, on top of that, it'll also give you some news from the sites that you have access to. It'll give you a list of frequently visited sites. And in some cases, it'll also suggest new sites that you have access to that you may be interested in, but you may not currently be using. So again, these are all the different resources that the SharePoint app will get you. So let's talk about how to get to the SharePoint app. Now, like I mentioned, this is part of Microsoft 365, which is cloud computing. So most of the time we access this information through your browser. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up Microsoft Edge. Now, again, you can use whichever browser you want. Now, typically what I like to do is I like to go through the front door in Office 365. How do we do that? Well, you just go to the address bar, type in office.com, and press enter. Now, if you are working on your work computer, it should automatically recognize your credentials. It should automatically recognize your account. Now, you'll notice that for this training, I'm using my instructor account, and I can see it says instructor, and you'll notice that his name is Sheldon Cooper. So that is the account that I'm using for today. And notice it automatically recognized it. It logged me in automatically when I went to office.com. Now, when you go to office.com, it brings you to the Office portal. And what this portal page does is that it gives you a curated list of documents and resources just for you. But also note that down the left, you have a little toolbar, if you will. You can get to your content, you can get to your Outlook, Teams, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. But where's SharePoint? Well, this is where I'm going to introduce you to what many call the waffle. You'll notice that on the top left of my screen here, I have this little icon that looks like a waffle. Now, technically, that's called the app launcher. Now, when you click the app launcher, it opens up and it gives you many more resources and apps. Now, again, some of these are familiar, like Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, but notice that you will have many, many other apps available here. Maybe you've been working with OneDrive, right? Maybe you've been working with some of these other tools such as Teams. Now, in this case, obviously I'm looking for SharePoint, and you can see that SharePoint displays right there for me. Now, if for whatever reason, when you click that app launcher, if SharePoint doesn't show up for you right away, you could also go to the bottom of the list where it says all apps. This will give you an alphabetically sorted list of every single app that you have available in Microsoft 365. And eventually you should come across the SharePoint app. So when I click SharePoint, notice it opens up a new tab and it takes me to that SharePoint app. Now, this is what I was calling your home base. And as I mentioned, you notice that down the left, it gives you a link, a shortcut to all of the sites that you've chosen to follow. Below that, it gives you recent sites that you visited. And then notice we also have featured links that your organization has featured for all users. You'll also see frequently visited sites and some of the latest activity. Now, in some cases, you'll also see here down the left, items that you have saved for later. And towards the very bottom, you can see that it's also sometimes suggesting new sites for you. Now, later on, I'm going to show you how you can choose to follow a site. And again, following a site simply means that it's going to bookmark it here under your followings. Now, there may be a time where you followed so many sites, they don't all display here down the left. So notice you can click where it says See All. And here are all of the sites that I've chosen to follow. So once I locate the site that I want to access, for example, right now I'm going to access the Human Resources site. I click on it and it takes me directly there. Now, let me start off by saying, remember how I mentioned that you could choose to follow a site? So anytime you access a SharePoint site that you know you want to quickly get back to, on the top right, you're going to see a little star icon, and that is where you can click to follow the site. Now notice I'm already following it, so that star is already filled in and it says that I'm following. Now if you are following a site and you choose that you no longer need to, you can click on it and then you'll see an empty star and it'll tell you you are not following it. But again, just click on it. Now you followed it, and what that did is it just bookmarked it under your SharePoint app, making it much easier to get back to. Now, let's talk about the interface of SharePoint. Because we're dealing with SharePoint Online, you will always have the banner across the top. This is called the header. Now, again, this header is consistent across all of Microsoft 365, regardless if you're in SharePoint or any other resource. Now, this is where you saw that little waffle or the app launcher, so you can always jump from one app to another. Now, you may have your organization's branding. Notice that I just have the OfficePro logo there. It also tells you that you are currently in SharePoint. And by the way, if you ever want to get back to the SharePoint app, besides going to the app launcher and clicking SharePoint, you can also click the SharePoint link here, and notice that takes you back. Okay? Now, let's go back to human resources. Now, again, going across the top, you'll also see the search where it'll allow you to search the site that you're currently in. You'll see news, you'll see settings, help, and then again, your profile. Now, let's take a look at the interface of the site itself. Now, across the top, you should see the title of the site. You should see the icon that represents that site, if that site has had a specific icon applied to it. But you'll notice that down the left, you'll have a list of links. Now, this is called the site navigation or the quick links or quick launch area. Now, the one thing to note is that the links down the left allow you to navigate throughout the various resources within the site that you're in. So notice for human resources, I see a link back to the homepage, which is where I'm currently at. I see a link to documents, policies and procedures, online resources pages. Now, one thing I want to bring to your attention is while there are some links here to some of the resources within the site, there may be a time where some of the resources you're looking for within the site may not be linked down the left. So you can get to all of the site's content by clicking this link that says Site Contents. And this will give you a comprehensive list of all the resources in the site, regardless if they have been pinned here down the left or not. Now, let me go back to the home page. Now, in some cases, the site that you're currently in may have subsites. Now, what are subsites? A subsite allows your organization to divide and conquer, if you will. So right now I'm in the SharePoint site for human resources, but can you imagine us trying to manage all of the data that human resources manages in one central place? It can get a little cluttered. So you'll notice that across the top, right above the title here, I have links to some subsites. So notice there is a subsite specifically for recruitment, a subsite for employee benefits, grievances, and a fall conference. So again, if you or your organizations need to divide and conquer, you may have subsites under the site that you're in, and the top link bar across the top is how you can navigate down that hierarchy. Now, remember I mentioned down the left-hand side, these are the links that will navigate you throughout the resources within the site that you're in. And these links across the top, those are links that will typically navigate you from one site to another. Now watch closely. If I click Fall Conference, I am technically now in a completely different site. So you'll notice that the resources down the left have changed. Now, I still have the link to the homepage. I still have documents, but notice that now I have some fall conference specific resources such as the registration, schedule, guest speakers, assignments, and again, I still have site contents, but if I go to site contents now, it's going to show me the site contents for fall conference rather than human resources. So again, just to recap, how do you get to SharePoint? Well, you could simply start off by going to office.com, logging in, going to the app launcher, and clicking on SharePoint to access the SharePoint app. And then from there, you can navigate to the various sites that it provides you with. Now, if you know the website address for the specific site you want to access. Of course, you can go into the address bar and type it in there directly, or you can bookmark it in your browser or mark it as a favorite. And you can, of course, go directly to a SharePoint site if that's easier for you. So again, there's many ways to get to SharePoint. Okay, Now, let's talk about this fancy term called content structures. Content structures. Now, content structures is simply a fancy word to say the containers of the content in your SharePoint sites. See, once we get to the site, obviously we're getting to the site so we can access the resources, the content, the information, the data, the documents that that site hosts. But the information can come in two main categories, if you will. We have lists and libraries. Now, let's start off with libraries. What do libraries do? Well, libraries allow you to store, manage, and track files and documents. Essentially, this is what allows SharePoint to serve as a document management system. So let's take a look at how this works. Let's go back to my SharePoint site here. Now, I'm going to be working out of the fall conference. So keep in mind, the scenario is that we have a conference coming up in the fall, and we needed a central place to start coordinating and organizing everything for that conference. So we created the SharePoint site so that me and my team can work together on coordinating everything. Now, whenever a SharePoint site is created, it will always have the default documents library. And so notice down the left, you will typically always find documents. Now, when I go to the documents library, notice I already have a folder with a couple of files in there. We have a couple of other files. But let's talk about how did these files get in here in the first place? Well, there are many ways to populate your libraries. There are many ways to add content and share them here. Now, as we go throughout the rest of the presentation, always keep in mind the concept of SharePoint is collaborating. So any content that now lives in SharePoint doesn't technically belong to you, it belongs to that SharePoint site and the team of people that have access and that are collaborating on it. Now, let's say I have a couple of documents that are related to fall conference that I would like to share. Let's say I have a couple of financial documents. Well, I could upload them directly to the root of the library, or I could create a folder. Now, notice that across the top of the library, I have a little button or a drop-down menu rather that says new. And I can create a variety of new different objects such as folders, Word, Excel, PowerPoint files, OneNote, even Visio or links. For right now, I'm going to create a folder and I'm going to call it Financial Docs. Then I can click Create. And just like that, I have a brand new folder. Now to upload files into that folder, I'm going to click on it to open it up. And now, if I have pre-existing files that I want to upload, notice that again, going back to the toolbar across the top, I have this upload button. And from there, I'll be able to select what I want to upload. In this case, I'm going to just select files. Notice it lets me navigate to wherever my files reside. I have some files on my desktop in a folder called Fall Conference. Now remember, I'm uploading financial documents. So notice I have the budget Excel spreadsheet, and I'm going to hold down my control button because notice I also have charges for supplies. Charges for supplies. Once I've selected all the files I want, I can then click open. Give that a moment or two. Notice that immediately those started getting uploaded, and voila, there they are. Now, one thing I want to make sure you understand is that when you upload files into SharePoint or pre-existing files into SharePoint, just keep in mind that you're uploading a copy. So those files that were on my desktop are now separate copies than the ones that I now have uploaded here in SharePoint. Now, I always like to recommend, think through the process of, is it necessary to keep both copies? Because now I have two different copies of the same files. I have my own copies on my desktop, and then I have these that now my whole team has access to. They will be able to open and potentially edit and update. It's kind of like saving a file to a shared drive. So there may be a time where you don't need to keep both copies. Okay, now that's it. So I was able to upload some files. I can go back to the root or navigate up in that folder structure by clicking the name of the library, and there you are. Now, there is another way to upload files. For example, some of you may be more comfortable dragging and dropping files. So watch this. I'm going to open up that folder on my desktop. Let me bring this over here. Okay, so notice here I have File Explorer, and I'm going to navigate to my desktop. Here I have my fall conference documents. Now, let's say that I want to upload a couple of other files. Maybe I want to upload the agenda. Maybe I want to upload this picture. Maybe I want to upload this presentation and the registrations. Well, notice that I can take those and drag them from File Explorer into the browser. Now notice, watch closely, look at the browser as I drag these files over it. You see how I get this dashed border around my library? That means that when I drop them in there, it's going to recognize that I want to upload those files, and immediately a copy of those were uploaded into my SharePoint site and shared with the rest of the team. And by the way, if you have a whole folder, you can also drag and drop it. So if I have a folder with files regarding the venue, I can take that folder and all of its content and I can drag and drop it in here. Now, notice it's going to first recreate that folder and all of the content will be uploaded and shared with the team. So it's that simple. Now, I do want to show you this. If later I create another folder, and I'm going to call this one logistics. Now, I now have a folder called logistics. Let's say that I want to move the venue folder into the logistics folder. So when you need to move content around, if you need to move it just to another folder here, what you could do is just drag and drop it, just like if you were dealing with files through File Manager. And notice that venue folder was now moved under logistics and we're good to go. But what if I want to move agenda, the agenda for the conference, into logistics? Again, I could drag and drop it, but there may be a time where you have such a long list of content, you may not be able to see them both at the same time. So let me show you an alternative. You can select the file or folder that you want to move, and then on the toolbar right across the top, now you may need to click the ellipsis to get more options, but notice you have move to or copy to. Now you can click move to, and it'll allow you to select a folder in the same library, or if you want to switch it to a different library, you may be able to access those from here, or you can even move it to a whole new site. But in this case, I'm just going to select the logistics folder and I'm going to click move here. And notice the agenda for the conference is no longer here. It's now under logistics. So again, it makes it very easy to upload or drag and drop files into SharePoint, making a copy of them in SharePoint, and now making those available to the rest of the team. And you can organize them in folders. You can move them around as necessary. Super easy to do so. But what happens when you need a new file in here, but it doesn't exist yet? So let's say I just attended a meeting and regarding the budget, and I want to take down some notes, but I don't have that document yet. Well, I can actually create it right here from the library. So watch this. Since this is related to the budget, I'm going to put it inside the financial documents folder. Now, once I'm in that folder, remember how we were able to create a new folder from the new drop-down menu? But just like that, I'm able to create all sorts of types of documents. Right now, I'm going to keep it simple with a Word document. So I'm going to click Word, and notice I get a brand new Word document. Now, the interesting thing is this did not open the Word app on my computer, but rather it loaded it through Word Online. Now, what is Word Online? Well, Word Online is a version of Word that loads through the browser. Notice I'm still here in Microsoft Edge. It opened up another tab. It gave me a brand new Word document in Word Online. And I have similar tabs as the regular desktop application, so I can do all of the core functionality. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this meeting notes budget review. And below that, I'll go ahead and enter today's date. And then the first thing I like to do is I like to keep track of attendees. Now, I know Beth was in the meeting, Aaron was in the meeting, I was in the meeting, but I want to start formatting it. Now, similar to Word, here we have styles that you could use. So for example, if I want this to be the title, I can go to the styles and here's title. The date will be the subtitle. So I'm going to make that the subtitle. Now, attendees, that's a main section of my document, so I'll apply the heading 1. And maybe I want to bullet the attendees. So notice right over here. Super easy to do. Now, one of the interesting things when you're working with online apps is that everything you do, the moment you do it, is automatically saved. So this document is already saved. How do I know that? Because it tells me right across the top, this is saved. And if I click on it, notice it says that it was saved just now. But if this is already saved, what did it call this document? Because I just created it, it never prompted me to name the file. Well, when I created the file, it saved it immediately and it simply just called it document. So watch this. If I go back to that folder, notice I have a new Word document called document. Now, that name is way too generic. That's not going to help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this file before I close it out. So I'm going to go back up here where I see the file name. And notice there's the file name field. So I'll call it meeting notes, and I'll include the name of the meeting, budget review. After that, you just press enter, and voila, you have effectively renamed the meeting. Or excuse me, renamed the document rather. Now, I'm going to come back and add some notes later on, but for right now, I'm just going to close it out. Now, again, everything is saved, so I don't have to worry about saving or doing anything special. I can just click the X to close out that browser tab. Now, notice the file's still called documents, but sometimes you may need to just refresh your browser. Ah, there it is. So now it reflects the new change. So as you can see, it makes it really, really easy to go in there and work with those documents. Now, let's say at a later time, I want to come back and add additional notes or action items that came out of this meeting. So to edit a file, all you have to do is locate it, click on the name, and again, notice it opens it right up. It opens it right up. So let's say that I want to add some action items or follow-up items. So I'm going to click and add another title here called action items. And again, I'm going to apply the heading 1, and I'm going to bullet these items. Now, let's say that Beth needs to submit her expenses, and then Juan needs to update and share the budget report. Okay, just like that, I'm finished. Now, again, notice that it says it was saved. So at this point, once I'm finished editing this document, all I have to do is click the X to close it, and voila. So notice, you just open up the document, make the changes you want, close it up. But I want to show you a different scenario. Let's say I want to go back to it. I'm going to click the document again, and as usual, it'll open it up in Word Online. Now, I don't know if how familiar you all are with Word, but in Word, there are these things called themes. There are these things called document formatting or style sets. And I often like to customize my documents with those features, but you can look up and down all you want here in the web app, and there are going to be some features that are simply not available through the web. So what I want to show you is that if you ever run across some limitations when you're working through the web, you can always jump into the full desktop application. Now, to do so, there are many ways to do so. If you are already editing in the web app, what you can do is up here where it says editing, you can click the drop down and select open in desktop app. When I do that, it will launch, in this case, Word, and notice here it is, and it'll open up that document right away. So now that I'm in the full desktop application, I have all of the familiar features that I'm used to. So now I can go to the design tab, and notice here we have themes, and I can go through and play around with the different theme options, select the one I want. And remember I mentioned there was this other thing called document formatting? Well, here it is. So notice this will allow me to reconfigure all the styles in my document and let me customize it with minimal effort. You see that? And there you go. Now, remember how I mentioned that anytime you're working in the online app, it automatically saves? Well, now even the full desktop application does so as well. These changes that I just made to my document, they're already saved. How do I know that? Well, it tells me right up here again. Now, the one difference is that when you're working with the desktop app, you have the option to turn that autosave off. That way, you can make changes and they won't be saved until you're finished editing it when you'll be prompted to save. But I'll tell you what, I want to keep it on. So I'm going to go ahead and close the document. Now, I can close this browser here, and that's it. I know that all those changes were saved, and I can see that the document reflects that it was modified just a few seconds ago. You see that? Now, let's say I want to go back in there because I forgot I needed to add some more information. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to open it up. Now, let's say that I forgot Bonnie, my colleague Bonnie was in the meeting. So I'm going to click in there and I'm going to add Bonnie. Let's say I'm also going to add Rachel. And let's say that I need Rachel to provide me some info on how much the venue reservation is going to be. So I'm going to go in here and Rachel to find out how much the venue reservation will be. Now, as I'm working, I start noticing this little flag, this little icon moving around. And you'll notice that all of a sudden, I see changes that are being made. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? So I'm going to point to this and notice that it pops up the name of my colleague, Dwight Schrute. So what's happening here? Well, remember I mentioned that everything in SharePoint is a collaborative, it's in the collaborative environment. So my colleague, Dwight, saw the meeting notes and he thought, oh, well, let me go in and contribute. So he was able to jump into that document and start editing it, and then I jump back in. So now what's happening is we are co-authoring. So any files that reside in SharePoint by default will allow you to co-author. Now, I do want to show you there's a feature that you could use to avoid this. So let's talk about that. Let's say I'm finished editing my budget notes. So remember, one of my tasks was that I needed to update the budget report and I needed to share it. So I'm going to close this out. And Dwight can continue making his changes as necessary. Now, here I have the budget report. Now, in this case, I want to make sure that I'm able to update the budget, but not have anyone else in there co-authoring with me. So to do that, I have the option to check a file out. Now, to check a file out, I can check to select the file. And then going back to the toolbar across the top, I can click on the little ellipsis here and notice I can check out this file. Now, when I check out this file, I will see a little red circle next to it indicating that I have it reserved. Now, what does that do? Well, once I've reserved it, I've checked it out, I've essentially reserved it for exclusive editing. And what that does is that while I have it checked out, no one else can edit that document, nor can they see the changes I'm making to it. Now, they can open and read it, but they cannot edit it, nor can they see the changes that I've been making to it. So now that I've checked it out, I can rest assured that I'm going to be the only one that can edit this file. So I'm going to open up that budget report. Now again, notice how it opened it up in Excel Online. So I'm going to go in here and make some changes. Let's say we needed to rent some more equipment. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change the actual to 15,000. And let's say we needed to hire more staff, so let's change that to 5,000. And maybe I want these to really jump out to my colleagues, so I'm going to highlight them. Now again, because this document is working with Excel Online, it is being automatically saved. So once I'm finished editing it, I can close that browser tab. Now, if you did check out a file, once you are finished editing it, you definitely want to make sure you check it back in. Now, let me show you why that is. Now, in this other browser, I'm actually logged in as Dwight, that other user. Now notice Dwight is in the fall conference site, he's in the documents library, he's in the financial documents, and he can see that budget. Now notice that he sees a little white circle indicating to him that someone else has it checked out. And if he points to it, it'll tell him that Sheldon Cooper checked out this item. Now he can click on it, and like I mentioned, he can see the file. But two things, notice the changes that Sheldon did are not visible, nor can Dwight edit it. Notice how all the ribbons are grayed out. And if he tries to type something in here, notice it says, sorry, you're in read only. You see that? And even if he clicks edit workbook, it lets him know that someone else has this workbook checked out. So you can see that checking out a file does work. Now, so to check it back in, let's say Dwight is finished editing it, so he can go back and select that file. And just like he checked it out, he can go back to the ellipsis, he can check it back in, and it asks if you want to add a version comment. So I'm going to say updated a few of the expenses. All right, check it back in, and there it goes. All right. All right. So there you go, guys. That is libraries. Now, let's talk about this other category of content structures called lists. Now, if libraries allow you to store, manage, and track files and documents, what in the world do lists do? Well, lists allow you to store, manage, and track groups of similar items. First of all, what does that even mean? Well, let me restate that. Lists allow you to store, manage, and track information directly right there in the SharePoint site itself. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Now, keep in mind, documents or libraries rather allow you to manage documents. Lists allow you to manage information. Now, a SharePoint site will not include any default lists. Now, like I mentioned, you will have the default documents library, but because lists has to do with information and the information you and your organizations are keeping track of, especially when there's a site very specific to a specific purpose, the type of information you're going to be managing is very unique and proprietary to that use case. So it's up to the members and the owners to add the lists that are necessary. But you'll notice that in this case, under Fall Conference, we needed a way to keep track of the contact information for our guest speakers. So notice down the left, I have guest speakers. And notice I already have 2 of my guest speakers, but if I need to add another one, I can click New, and notice how it allows me to add a new item. Now, let's say last name is Smith, first name is Felicia. So Felicia Smith. Her email is fsmith@contoso.com. Company, contoso.com. Job title, sales manager. Phone. And let's say her mobile. It makes it super easy. You can add all this information, click save once you're done, and just like that, I've added some more information here. Now notice when I'm looking at this list, essentially what this is just a bunch of columns and rows. So when you think of a list, think of it as a table of information. The columns represent the different fields, and the rows represent the different records. But what type of information each list will track really depends on how that list was designed and what was the purpose of the list. So in this case, we needed to keep track of contact information for our guest speakers. Great. But you'll notice that down the left, I also have a list called schedule. Now, in this case, this is a calendar list, and this is a way that we can keep track of events that we're going to conduct in preparation for the fall conference. So let's say that on the 24th, we're gonna have some guest speaker interviews. So I'm gonna point to the 21st. I'm gonna click add, and I'm gonna call it guest speaker interviews. Location, I'll put it in conference 123. Now notice the date is pre-populated because I clicked on it, but now I can specify the times. Let's say it'll be from 10 through noon. I can add a description if I needed to. I can add a category. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and there it goes. Now, what if I need to add the conference itself? Now, the conference will be in September, so I'm going to go to September, and it'll start on the 15th and go through the 16th. So I'm going to point and click add from the 15th, and I'll call this fall conference. Now, let's say that we don't have the location yet. We don't have the venue. So I'm going to put in here TBD, to be determined. Now, in this case, it's going to be a 2-day conference. So I'm going to change the end date to the 16th. And notice none of the categories really make sense here. So I'm going to enter my own value for the categories. I'm going to enter event. Now, even though this is going to be a 2-day event, it'll be an all day, both days. So notice I can check this to says all day event. Then I can click save, and there it is. So again, this is just another form of a list. All right, one more. You'll notice down the left, we are also keeping track of the registrations. So when I go to the registrations, again, notice it's a table of information. It's allowing me to keep track of the registration information. To register someone new, I click new, and I can enter their name. Let's say I'm going to register myself. So I'm going to put in my last name, my first name, my ID. Let's say I work in the production department. I'm a status 6. Now, under attending, I'm going to leave it as yes. I will attend both days. And I haven't gotten approved yet, so I'm not going to provide payment info quite yet. So I'll check no and then save. And that's it. I just registered myself. Now, you'll notice that in this list, for some weird reason, all of the new records go to the bottom of the list. So what I want to show you is that when you're dealing with information, you can sort it however you want. So if I want to see them sorted by last name, I can click on this little drop down and I can choose to sort by any column, either ascending or descending. So I'm going to sort it ascending. And now you'll notice that my new record is now sorted alphabetically with the C's there. Now, you'll notice that it shows me all the information, but let's say I only want to see the attendance or the registrations for my department. So watch this. If I go to the department, there's also an option, besides sorting, there's an option for filtering. And then I can choose what I want to see. So I only want to see the production department and then click apply. And just like that, notice all I'm seeing is my production department and I'm seeing it sorted by last name. And by the way, the sort and the filtering also applies for documents as well. So you can sort by any column, you can filter by any column, and there you go. All right, guys, well, guess what? That is an introduction to SharePoint. Now, we still have a couple of minutes, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and open up for Q&A. If any of you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you are more than welcome to ask any questions. Now, you can post them in the questions pane by clicking that little toolbar on the far right. You can click on that little orange button to expand the control panel. You'll see the questions pane at the bottom. Or if you prefer, you could just unmute yourself and ask away. I just enabled the unmute option, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions. Now, I'm going to start with a question that I see in the chat. It says, can you demo how to create a list, specifically a schedule, as you covered a little while ago? Sure. Now, the calendar list is called a legacy list versus, for example, the registrations. This is a modern list. Now, the only reason you need to know that is if you want to add a list, one way you can do so is go to Site Contents. And from the top, you're going to see the drop down for new. Now, if you're trying to add a modern list, you can use the list option. But if you're trying to use the legacy lists, what you're going to do is you're going to go down to app and notice I use the term legacy. SharePoint calls it a classic list. So from here, you can click classic experience. Now from here, you're going to get all of these little templates for lists, and you'll notice that there are a template for announcements, context, calendar, tasks, discussions, issues tracking. There's all sorts of options, but here's the one that I use for that schedule. So you can click the calendar. It asks, what do you want to call the list? Let's say I want to call this one events. And again, you can call yours whatever you want, and then click create. And that's it. You'll notice that now in my site contents, I have a new list called events. When I click on it, it's just another calendar list. All right, there you go. Very good question. Now I see another question that was submitted. So as I stepped in a couple minutes, and then I see how you created a new post. Can you repeat it? Now, when you say a new post, can you be a little bit more specific? Okay.
I don't know how this fall conference was created.
Oh,
I tried to create one, but and then ask me who can see it. I don't want the whole company see it. So how to do that?
Okay, so you're asking how do I create an entire new site?
Yeah,
Is that
how,
correct?
yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Well, let me mention this. In the Fairfax environment, you would need to submit the request to DIT to create a new site. And it's actually similar to requesting a new team in Microsoft Teams, because if you are in Teams and down the left hand side you go to Teams, notice I'm a member of the human resources team, I'm a member of the training team. And if I go to the training team, notice that I can click on the ellipsis here and tell it to open in SharePoint. So what happens is anytime you have a team created, that team will have an associated SharePoint site. Unfortunately, not any user can create these teams and these sites. So in your environment, you will need to submit that request through DIT. Okay?
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Now I see there's another question that says, can you show how to create a new page? Yes. So another element in SharePoint is pages. So for example, let me go back here to my fall conference. Let's say I want to create a new page to just simply display some content. Now, typically what you'll notice is down the left-hand side, you'll see a link that says pages. Now, if for whatever reason that's not there, you can go to Site Contents and then look for Site Pages. So if I would have clicked on page here, it would have brought me here anyways. Now, this is a library that'll contain all the web pages in your site. And you'll notice that across the top, I have the option to create a new page. And there are three different types. There's wiki page, web part page, and site page. Now, here's what I recommend. I definitely recommend you use a site page because this is the most modern option and it'll give you the most modern experience. Okay, but you can play around with the different types and see what the differences are. So I'll just create a new page. Okay, and it asks what you want to call it. I'll just to put something in here, logistics. And then you can add different sections. So notice I can click this little plus. I can select what layout I want. Let's say I want 2 columns. And then under each column, you can point to these little pluses right across the top to add what are called web parts. Think of these web parts as like little building blocks. Now, let's say that I want to add a list from my site. Now, I see the list web part here, but you can also search for it. So if I would have typed in list, it narrows down the web parts. And when I add it, it asks, well, what list do you want to add? Let's say down the left, I want my guest speakers. And maybe over here on the right, I'll add a list for my registration so I can see those in the same space. And of course, we can spend hours playing around with this, but once you're ready, you can then click publish, give that a minute, and it'll give you different options on how you can share this. You can share it via email, via Yammer, via a post in the news. But what I want to do is maybe I want to add a link to this page down the left. So notice add page to navigation, and that's it. I can close it. So now whenever anybody accesses my fall conference site, they'll see a new link down the left called logistics, and they'll see whatever content I've put there. So that's how you can create a new page. Okay? All right. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right, well, if there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, want to thank you all for attending today's SharePoint introduction webinar. I do hope that you got a lot out of it. And I will wrap up by saying this. If you are interested in some more in-depth, hands-on training, I will mention that we are often providing some 3-hour training sessions on SharePoint, both an introduction for end users as well as an advance for site owners that focus on how to create and how to manage all of the components here. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for whenever a new class is posted through Employee U, and I hope we'll see you in some future training. Have a great afternoon, everyone.